Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. For over 1,000 years, one name dominated the known world, a symbol of unparalleled power, engineering, and law: Rome. From a humble city-state on the Tiber River, it grew into a sprawling empire that stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-scorched sands of Mesopotamia. Its legions were invincible, its aqueducts were marvels of ingenuity, and its influence shaped the very foundations of Western civilization. But how did this colossal power rise to such heights? And more importantly, how did it all come crashing down? Join us as we journey through the epic saga of ambition, betrayal, conquest, and collapse, to uncover the story of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. To comprehend the immense stage upon which Kösem Sultan would one day command, a stage defined by absolute power and the weight of empire, we must first travel back in time. We must journey to the origins of the very concept of imperial dominion that would haunt and inspire the world for millennia. Our story does not begin in the gilded cages of Topkapi Palace, but on the muddy banks of the Tiber River, in a tale steeped in blood and myth. This is the legend of the Seven Hills, the violent birth of Rome. The story, as told by Livy and Virgil, begins with two infants, Romulus and Remus, twin sons of a Vestal virgin and the god Mars. Condemned to death by a jealous king, they were cast adrift, only to be miraculously saved by a she-wolf who suckled them as her own. This powerful image of survival against all odds, of being nurtured by a wild force, became the foundational myth of a people who would see themselves as destined for greatness, favored by the gods, yet forged in hardship. Raised by a shepherd, the brothers grew into natural leaders, their divine heritage marking them for a grander purpose. They decided to found a city, but their ambition immediately turned to rivalry. An argument over which of the 7 hills to build upon and who should rule escalated into a fatal conflict. In a fit of rage over a mocked boundary wall, Romulus struck down his own brother, Remus. Thus, the city of Rome was founded on an act of fratricide, its first walls consecrated with a brother's blood. This brutal beginning is not merely a footnote in history, it is a profound allegory for the nature of power, a theme that would echo down through the centuries and resonate powerfully within the serpentine corridors of the Ottoman court. The lesson was clear from the very start. Power is a solitary pursuit, and the throne has room for only one. For Kösem Sultan, centuries later, this ancient truth would be a daily reality. As she navigated a world where siblings, sons, and grandsons were all potential rivals in a deadly game for survival and supremacy. The city founded in blood soon grew tired of kings. The reign of Rome's 7th and final monarch, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, was marked by tyranny and capped by a scandal that inflamed the city's elite: the rape of the noblewoman Lucretia by the king's son. Her subsequent suicide ignited a rebellion led by Lucius Junius Brutus, who swore an oath to never again allow a king to rule Rome. In 509 BC, the monarchy was abolished and a radical new form of government was born, the res publica, the public affair. This was the Roman Republic, an institution built on the principle of shared power and the rule of law, a stark contrast to the absolute authority Kösem Sultan would one day wield. Power was deliberately fractured. In place of a king, 2 consuls were elected annually, each holding the power to veto the other, ensuring no single man could accumulate too much authority. The true heart of the Republic, however, was the Senate, an advisory council of elder statesmen, the patricians, whose influence shaped state policy, war, and finance. This intricate system of checks and balances was designed to prevent the rise of another tyrant. Yet, this new republic was far from a perfect democracy. It was a society rife with internal conflict, most notably the struggle of the orders between the wealthy patrician class and the common plebeians. This tension, this constant negotiation and struggle for power and rights within a structured system provides a crucial lens through which to view Kösem's era. The Ottoman Empire, too, was not a simple autocracy. It was a complex political ecosystem of competing factions. The Sultan's household, the powerful viziers of the Imperial Council, or Divan, the religious authority of the ulama, and the formidable military might of the Janissary Corps. Kösem Sultan, much like the great Roman senators, did not rule in a vacuum. Her power was not merely inherited, it was masterfully negotiated, manipulated, and defended within a labyrinth of established institutions and dangerous rivalries. She had to understand the laws, leverage the factions, and placate the powerful, proving that even in an empire ruled by a single dynasty, politics remained the ultimate art of survival. The fledgling republic, having established its dominance over the Italian peninsula, soon faced a rival that would test its very existence. Across the Mediterranean, in the city of Carthage, a commercial empire of Phoenician origin controlled the seas. The clash of these two rising powers was inevitable, leading to a series of conflicts known as the Punic Wars. It was in the second of these wars that Rome faced its darkest hour, personified by one of history's greatest military geniuses, Hannibal Barca. Sworn from childhood to be an enemy of Rome, Hannibal conceived a plan of breathtaking audacity. In 218 BC, he marched an army of men, horses, and war elephants from Iberia, across the Pyrenees, and most remarkably, over the treacherous, snow-covered Alps into Italy. He brought the war to Rome's doorstep, bypassing its naval supremacy entirely. For over a decade, Hannibal inflicted one catastrophic defeat after another upon the Romans. At the Battle of Cannae, he executed a perfect double envelopment, annihilating a Roman army nearly twice the size of his own. The losses were staggering, shaking the Republic to its core. The phrase, "Hannibal ad portas," Hannibal at the gates, became a terrifying reality, a cry of panic that would echo for generations. Yet Rome did not break. It endured. This period of existential crisis reveals the true source of Roman strength. Not just its legions, but its incredible resilience, its social cohesion, and its political will to continue the fight, no matter the cost. This narrative of survival against a seemingly unstoppable foe is a recurring theme in the history of great empires. Centuries later, the Ottoman Empire, the state Kösem Sultan would fight to preserve, faced its own Hannibal ad portas moments. It was an empire besieged by powerful external enemies like the Safavids in the east and the Habsburgs in the west, and crippled by internal decay and rebellion. Kösem's regency occurred during one of the most turbulent periods, the Sultanate of Women, where she had to steer the ship of state through military revolts and court conspiracies. Her story, like Rome's, is one of resilience in the face of near-certain collapse, a testament to the will required to hold an empire together when it seems destined to fall apart. Having survived Hannibal and ultimately razing Carthage to the ground in the Third Punic War, Rome stood unopposed. Its victory unleashed an era of relentless expansion. The Republic, once a regional Italian power, transformed into the undisputed master of the Mediterranean basin, a sea the Romans would come to call Mare Nostrum, our sea. In the east, the legions marched through Greece, conquering the Hellenistic kingdoms that had emerged from the empire of Alexander the Great. The cultural treasures and philosophies of Athens and Corinth were brought back to Rome, profoundly shaping its art, literature, and identity. In the north, Roman armies pushed into Gaul under generals like Julius Caesar, extending the Republic's borders to the Atlantic. In the south, all of North Africa fell under its sway. This conquest brought unimaginable wealth, resources, and slaves flooding into the capital. The city of Rome swelled into a sprawling, chaotic metropolis, the center of a globalized world. But this success came at a price. The very foundations of the Republic began to crack under the strain of managing such a vast and diverse empire. The traditional citizen farmer-soldier was replaced by professional, long-serving legions who were more loyal to their charismatic and wealthy generals than to the distant Senate. Figures like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar commanded immense personal power and private armies, turning Roman politics into a violent struggle between warlords. The immense wealth corrupted the political system, widening the gap between the super-rich elite and the impoverished masses. This transformation from a republic to a de facto empire, long before the first emperor was crowned, is a critical lesson in statecraft. It mirrors the very nature of the empire Kösem Sultan would inherit. The Ottoman Empire was also the master of our sea, controlling the Mediterranean and the vital trade routes to the east. It too was a vast, multi-ethnic, multi-religious state, whose management was a constant balancing act. And crucially, Kösem had to contend with the power of the Janissaries, a military force whose loyalty could make or break a sultan, much as the Roman legions had done for their generals. By the middle of the 2nd century BC, Rome was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. The riches of conquest flowed into the city, but they pooled in the hands of a wealthy few, creating a chasm between the senatorial elite and the common citizenry. Into this powder keg stepped two brothers of impeccable aristocratic lineage, the Gracchi. Their grandfather was Scipio Africanus, the man who defeated Hannibal. Their mother, Cornelia, was a paragon of Roman virtue. Yet, they would become the Republic's most dangerous revolutionaries. The elder, Tiberius Gracchus, was elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BC. Appalled by the sight of vast estates worked by slaves, while Roman farmers lost their land and flocked to the city, he proposed a radical solution: the Lex Sempronia Agraria. This law would enforce existing limits on the amount of public land one person could own and redistribute the surplus to landless Roman citizens. To the senatorial elite, whose wealth was built on these vast estates, this was not reform. It was theft. They saw Tiberius as a demagogue, a threat to their property and the established order. When they convinced another tribune to veto the bill, Tiberius took an unprecedented step. He had the popular assembly vote to depose the dissenting tribune, shattering centuries of political tradition. The law passed, but its implementation was fiercely resisted. Fearing for his life and the future of his reforms, Tiberius sought re-election, another violation of custom. The situation boiled over. On election day, A mob of senators and their clients, led by the Pontifex Maximus himself, grabbed makeshift clubs and bludgeoned Tiberius and 300 of his followers to death on the Capitoline Hill. For the first time, political disputes in Rome were settled, not with debate, but with blood. A decade later, his younger brother Gaius Gracchus took up the cause with even greater ambition. His program was a sweeping assault on senatorial power, including subsidized grain, public works projects, and judicial reforms. For a time, he was the most powerful man in Rome. But the Senate had learned its lesson. They outmaneuvered him, and when his support waned, they passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, a decree that effectively declared martial law. Hunted by his enemies, Gaius committed suicide. The Gracchi were dead, their reforms undone, but they had exposed the Republic's fatal flaw and left behind a terrifying legacy: the knowledge that political power could be won through violence. The blood spilled by the Gracchi brothers stained the Roman Forum, creating a precedent that would soon be followed on a terrifying scale. The Republic's internal sickness was about to metastasize, personified by two towering figures, Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Marius was a novus homo, a new man from outside the traditional Roman aristocracy, who rose through sheer military genius. His greatest and most dangerous contribution was the radical reform of the Roman army. By abolishing the property requirement for service, he opened the legions to the landless poor, the proletarii. These men were not fighting for an abstract republic. They fought for the general who promised them pay, spoils, and most importantly, a plot of land for their retirement. The Roman army was transformed from a citizen militia into a professional force of clients, loyal not to the state, but to their commander. This created the tool that would dismantle the Republic, the private army. The man who would turn that tool against Rome itself was Sulla, an impoverished patrician and Marius's ambitious former subordinate. Their rivalry festered for years, finally exploding over the lucrative command of the war against Mithridates of Pontus. The Senate gave the command to Sulla, but Marius, using a friendly tribune, had the popular assembly transfer it to him. Sulla's response was unthinkable. He did what no Roman commander had ever dared to do. He turned his legions against his own country. He marched on Rome, took the city by force, and forced Marius to flee for his life. After Sulla departed for the east, a vengeful Marius returned, unleashing a bloody purge of his political enemies. But his triumph was short-lived. He died just days into his 7th consulship. Years later, Sulla returned from the east victorious, initiating the first full-scale Roman civil war. He crushed the Marian forces, entered Rome as its absolute master, and unleashed a horror known as the proscriptions. He posted lists of his enemies, declaring them outlaws whose property was forfeit and whose murder was rewarded. Thousands were killed. Sulla had himself declared dictator for the reconstitution of the Republic, an old title he revived with absolute power and no term limit. The age of private armies had arrived, and the Republic was now merely the prize for the next general ruthless enough to take it. In the violent, chaotic world left behind by Marius and Sulla, a new generation of ambitious men learned a stark lesson. The old rules were dead, and power belonged to those bold enough to seize it. None learned this lesson better than Gaius Julius Caesar. A patrician with a lineage stretching back to the goddess Venus, he also had a direct connection to the losing side of the recent civil war. His aunt was the wife of Gaius Marius. This connection nearly cost him his life during Sulla's proscriptions. But the young Caesar was a master of survival and ambition. He understood that the path to power no longer ran solely through the Senate House, but through the hearts of the people and the loyalty of soldiers. He spent his early career cultivating an image as a champion of the people, incurring colossal debts to host lavish games and public works, making himself a popular fixture in Rome. His true genius, however, was in political alchemy. In 60 BC, he forged a secret alliance that would dominate Roman politics for a decade, the First Triumvirate. He brought together Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, its wealthiest man. Pompey had the legions, Crassus had the money, and Caesar had the political savvy and popular support. Together, they were an unstoppable force, capable of bending the Senate to their will. As his reward for holding up his end of the bargain, Caesar secured for himself the governorship of Gaul for an unprecedented term. This was the masterstroke that would change history. For nearly 9 years, Caesar waged the Gallic Wars, a brilliant and brutal campaign of conquest that brought the vast territory of modern-day France under Roman control. The wars provided him with 3 essential tools for ultimate power: unimaginable wealth from plunder, which he used to pay off his debts and purchase loyalty in Rome; a massive, battle-hardened army of veterans whose devotion was to him and him alone; and a carefully crafted legend of military invincibility, which he broadcast back to Rome through his own published commentaries. While he was conquering Gaul, the triumvirate in Rome was dissolving. Crassus was killed fighting the Parthians, and the personal bond between Caesar and Pompey was severed by the death of Caesar's daughter Julia, who was Pompey's wife. Pompey, now wary of his former ally's staggering power, drifted into the arms of the conservative senators who viewed Caesar as the greatest threat the Republic had ever faced. The stage was set for a final, cataclysmic confrontation. By 49 BC, the Roman Republic was a republic in name only, balanced on a knife's edge between its 2 most powerful sons, Caesar in Gaul and Pompey in Rome. The political machinations had reached their endgame. Caesar's long command in Gaul was expiring, and his enemies in the Senate, now firmly allied with Pompey, saw their chance. They intended to strip him of his command and his legions, forcing him to return to Rome as a private citizen, where he would face a barrage of politically motivated prosecutions designed to ruin him. Caesar knew this was a death sentence for his career and likely his life. He requested permission to stand for the consulship in absentia, a move that would grant him legal immunity, but the Senate refused. Instead, they issued an ultimatum: disband your army and surrender your command, or you will be declared an enemy of the state. The moment of truth had arrived. On a cold winter's night, Caesar stood with a single legion, the 13th, on the northern bank of a small, insignificant river called the Rubicon. But this river was anything but insignificant. It marked the sacred, legal boundary of Italy. For a Roman general to cross it at the head of an army was an explicit act of treason, a declaration of war against the Senate and people of Rome. For Caesar, there was no easy choice. To stay put meant political annihilation. To cross meant plunging the entire Roman world into a catastrophic civil war against Pompey, a general of immense skill and resources. Ancient historians tell us he hesitated, deeply weighing the calamity he was about to unleash. He spoke to his men, contemplating the irreversible nature of the step he was about to take. Then, with a resolve that would alter the course of Western civilization, he made his decision. Spurring his horse forward into the shallow water, he is said to have uttered the immortal words, "Alea iacta est." The die is cast. The crossing itself was not a battle. It was a quiet, fateful march that echoed with the death knell of the Republic. News of his act of defiance raced to Rome, causing mass panic. The senators, including Pompey, had miscalculated, never believing Caesar would dare to commit such a crime. Unprepared for the speed of his advance, they abandoned the capital and fled south. The point of no return had been passed. The Rubicon was not the cause of the Republic's death, but the final public declaration of it. The war to come would not be for the soul of the Republic, but for the name of its new master. The year is 44 BC. Rome, the heart of a sprawling republic, is a city holding its breath. At its center stands a figure of immense power and ambition, Gaius Julius Caesar. He had conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and defeated his rival Pompey in a bloody civil war. Now he was the undisputed master of Rome. The Senate, in a gesture of either genuine admiration or terrified submission, had recently named him Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. For many traditionalist senators, this was the final, unforgivable step. The title reeked of monarchy, an institution the Romans had overthrown centuries ago. The republic they feared was dying, and Caesar was its executioner. Whispers turned to plots in the shadowed porticos of the city. The conspiracy was led by Gaius Cassius Longinus, a bitter personal enemy of Caesar, and Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar had once pardoned and held in high esteem, almost like a son. They called themselves the Liberatores, the liberators. They believed they were not murderers, but saviors, acting to restore Roman liberty. They chose the Ides of March, the 15th of the month, for their deed. The location was the Theater of Pompey, where the Senate was temporarily meeting. As Caesar entered, he was surrounded. One senator pulled his toga, the prearranged signal. Immediately, the others drew their daggers, hidden in their scrolls. Caesar fought back, but he was hopelessly outnumbered. He was stabbed 23 times. According to the historian Suetonius, upon seeing Brutus among his attackers, Caesar uttered his final despairing words in Greek. Kai su, teknon. You too, my child. He then pulled his toga over his head and fell at the base of a statue of his great rival, Pompey the Great. The liberators, their hands and togas stained with blood, burst out to proclaim the tyrant was dead and the republic was saved. But they were met not with cheers, but with stunned, terrified silence. The city descended into chaos. The assassination did not restore the republic. It plunged Rome into 13 more years of brutal civil war, ultimately paving the way for the very thing the assassins had sought to prevent: the absolute rule of one man. In the chaotic vacuum left by Caesar's death, a new player emerged, one whom the powerful men of Rome completely underestimated. He was Gaius Octavius, Caesar's grandnephew. At the time of the assassination, he was a mere 18 years old, studying in Apollonia. When he learned that Caesar's will had not only made him incredibly wealthy, but had also posthumously adopted him as his son, he did not hesitate. He sailed for Italy, took the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, and set out to claim his inheritance. His rivals, like the seasoned General Mark Antony, initially dismissed him as a boy. But Octavian possessed a political cunning and ruthlessness that belied his years. He used his new name and vast fortune to win the loyalty of Caesar's veteran legions, who saw in him the heir to their beloved general. Realizing they could not defeat each other alone, Octavian, Mark Antony, and another of Caesar's generals, Marcus Lepidus, formed a strategic, if unstable, alliance known as the Second Triumvirate. Their first order of business was revenge. They instituted a brutal campaign of proscriptions, officially sanctioned murders of their political enemies, far more bloody than any before. Cicero, the great orator who had celebrated Caesar's death, was among their first victims. The triumvirate then turned its attention to the liberators. In 42 BC, at the Battle of Philippi in Macedonia, the forces of the triumvirate decisively crushed the armies of Brutus and Cassius, both of whom took their own lives rather than face capture. With their common enemies eliminated, the alliance of the triumvirs quickly fractured. Lepidus was sidelined, leaving the Roman world divided between two titans, Octavian in the west and Mark Antony in the east. Antony's political and romantic alliance with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, gave Octavian the propaganda weapon he needed. He portrayed Antony as a decadent traitor, bewitched by a foreign queen who sought to rule Rome from Alexandria. The final confrontation came in 31 BC at the naval battle of Actium. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant general Agrippa, annihilated the forces of Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled to Egypt, where they eventually committed suicide. At just 32 years old, Octavian was the sole, undisputed master of the Roman world. The Republic was truly dead, and the age of emperors was about to begin. After decades of brutal civil war, the Roman world was exhausted. It yearned for stability, for an end to the proscriptions, the endless battles, and the political chaos that had torn families and fortunes apart. Octavian, now styled as Augustus, or the Revered One, understood this deeply. He presented himself not as a king or a dictator, but as the princeps, the first citizen, who had restored the Republic. It was a masterful political fiction. In reality, he held absolute power, controlling the legions, the treasury, and the political appointments. With this power, he ushered in an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity that would last for 2 centuries, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. This was not a period of absolute tranquility. Legions still fought barbarian tribes on the frontiers in Germania and Parthia. But within the vast borders of the empire, from Britain to Syria, the constant threat of civil war vanished. Augustus initiated a series of profound reforms to secure this newfound stability. He professionalized the army, making it a standing force loyal not to individual generals, but to the emperor himself. He established the Praetorian Guard, an elite unit stationed in Rome to protect the emperor's person. He reformed the tax system to be more equitable and efficient, funding a massive program of public works. "I found Rome a city of brick," he famously boasted, "and left it a city of marble." Aqueducts brought fresh water to burgeoning cities, and a remarkable network of stone-paved roads connected the empire, facilitating trade, communication, and the swift movement of troops. This security allowed commerce to flourish. Grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, and silks from the distant east flowed into Rome. The arts thrived under imperial patronage, giving rise to a golden age of Latin literature, with poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid. For the average citizen of the empire, the Pax Romana meant a life of relative predictability and safety, a world governed by a unified system of law, where one could travel and trade with a degree of security unimaginable just a generation earlier. It was the foundation upon which Roman civilization would reach its zenith. Augustus ruled for over 40 years, a long and remarkably stable reign that set the template for the Roman Empire. The challenge, however, was what came next. Having established a system of one-man rule, the fate of the empire now rested entirely on the character of that one man. The dynasty he founded, the Julio-Claudians, would produce a gallery of emperors whose reigns ranged from competent to catastrophically insane. His successor, Tiberius, was a gloomy and capable general who grew increasingly paranoid and reclusive, ruling the empire from his island villa on Capri, while his ruthless Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, ran a reign of terror in Rome. After Tiberius came his great-nephew Caligula. His name has become synonymous with madness and cruelty. He engaged in scandalous affairs, squandered the treasury on lavish projects, and allegedly planned to make his favorite horse, Incitatus, a consul. His reign was a brief but terrifying spectacle of absolute power wielded by a depraved mind, and it ended abruptly with his assassination by his own Praetorian Guard. In the ensuing chaos, the guards discovered Caligula's uncle Claudius hiding behind a curtain. A stammering, limping scholar whom the family had long considered an embarrassment, he was unexpectedly proclaimed emperor. To everyone's surprise, Claudius proved to be a remarkably effective administrator. He expanded the empire, most notably by conquering Britain, and oversaw major public works and judicial reforms. His reign, however, was plagued by the deadly intrigues of his wives, particularly Messalina and Agrippina the Younger. It was Agrippina who allegedly poisoned him to clear the way for her own son, Nero. Nero's rule began promisingly, but descended into tyranny and extravagance. He fancied himself a great artist, forcing senators to attend his lyre recitals. He was widely blamed for the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, a disaster he used as an opportunity to build his opulent golden house. He initiated the first major persecution of Christians and ultimately drove his most powerful generals to rebellion. Declared a public enemy by the Senate, Nero fled Rome and took his own life, famously lamenting, "What an artist dies in me." His death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian line and plunged the empire back into a bloody civil war. The death of Sultan Murad IV in 1640 from cirrhosis was not just the end of a reign. It was a moment of supreme peril for the Ottoman dynasty itself. On his deathbed, consumed by a final, brutal rage, Murad had ordered the execution of his last surviving brother, Ibrahim. He believed Ibrahim, a man broken by decades of terror in the gilded prison known as the cafes, was unfit to rule and sought to extinguish the Ottoman line, passing the throne to the Khan of Crimea. It was in this crucible of dynastic desperation that Kösem Sultan made one of her most critical moves. She intervened directly, arguing, pleading, and ultimately fabricating stories of Ibrahim's compliance to placate the dying sultan. She saved her son's life, and in doing so, saved the dynasty from extinction. When Murad finally succumbed, the palace doors were opened, and officials approached the cafes to proclaim Ibrahim as the new sultan. But the man who emerged was not a triumphant heir. He was a specter haunted by a lifetime of fear. Ibrahim was so convinced it was a trick, another of Murad's cruel games to lure him to his death, that he barricaded the door. He refused to believe he was sultan until Kösem herself ordered Murad's corpse to be brought before the cafes. Only upon seeing his brother's lifeless body did Ibrahim, trembling, accept the throne. In those initial days, Kösem's power was absolute. Ibrahim was a puppet, utterly dependent on the mother who had just snatched him from the jaws of death. She guided his every move, managed the divan, and appointed officials, effectively continuing her regency in all but name. The empire breathed a collective sigh of relief. The brutal reign of Murad was over, and the seasoned, capable Valide Sultan was at the helm. But the relief was short-lived. The court soon realized that the man they had placed on the throne was not merely inexperienced. He was profoundly and dangerously damaged. The years of isolation had shattered his mind, leaving a volatile mix of paranoia and childish impulse that Kösem's control, however firm, could not entirely contain. Sultan Ibrahim's initial deference to his mother quickly dissolved, replaced by a reign of bewildering chaos and hedonistic excess. The psychological scars from his time in the cafes manifested in erratic and dangerous behavior that earned him the infamous epithet Ibrahim the Mad. His primary obsession was the harem. He sought to fill it with the most beautiful women in the empire, developing a particular fixation on large, heavy-set women. He dispatched agents across the land to find them, and his infatuation culminated in his discovery of an Armenian woman so large she was nicknamed Shekerpare, or lump of sugar. He became so besotted with her that he made her his legal wife and elevated her to the highest rank. This obsession was not just a personal quirk, it had dire political consequences. Kösem Sultan watched in horror as her influence was systematically undermined by a new inner circle of favorites. Rival concubines, charlatans, and sycophants whispered in Ibrahim's ear, feeding his paranoia and vanity. Chief among them was a faith healer named Chinsi Hoka, who promised Ibrahim cures for his ailments and amassed incredible wealth and power for himself. Ibrahim's decrees became increasingly bizarre. He lavished fortunes on sable furs to line the walls of the palace, triggering a period known as the Sable Age that crippled the treasury. He once ordered his entire harem of nearly 300 women to be bound in sacks and drowned in the Bosphorus based on a rumor of infidelity, though most were saved at the last moment. His profligacy knew no bounds, demanding ever-increasing taxes from the provinces and executing officials who failed to meet his extravagant demands. For Kösem, it was a nightmare. The son she had saved was now the empire's greatest liability. Her attempts to counsel him were met with suspicion and rage. He exiled her from Topkapi Palace for a time, stripping her of her income and authority. Kösem was forced to retreat, to watch from the sidelines as Ibrahim's madness threatened to unravel the very fabric of the state she had spent decades protecting. By 1648, the Ottoman Empire was teetering on the brink of collapse, and the source of the instability was the throne itself. Sultan Ibrahim's madness had escalated from mere eccentricity to a direct threat to the state. The disastrous and costly war against Venice for the island of Crete, initiated on a whim, was draining the treasury. His arbitrary executions of high-ranking officials, including the Grand Vizier, had created an atmosphere of terror and paralysis within the government. The breaking point came when Ibrahim, in a fit of rage, threatened to execute the entire corps of Janissary commanders. The Janissaries, the powerful backbone of the Ottoman military, were outraged and began to plot a rebellion. They turned to the one person they believed could restore order: Kösem Sultan. For Kösem, it was the ultimate agonizing choice. To save the empire, she would have to condemn her own son. It was a decision no mother should ever have to make, but Kösem had always placed the survival of the dynasty above all else. In secret meetings with the new Grand Vizier, Sofu Mehmed Pasha, and the revered Sheikh-ul-Islam, the highest religious authority, a conspiracy was forged. They secured a fatwa, a legal Islamic ruling, that declared a mentally unstable ruler could be deposed. With the full support of the military and the clergy, the conspirators acted. On August 8, 1648, the Janissaries stormed the palace. Ibrahim was seized and, in a tragic reversal of fortune, thrown back into the cafes from which he had emerged 8 years earlier. The throne was immediately given to his 6-year-old son, Mehmed IV. Yet, even in confinement, Ibrahim posed a threat. His supporters could attempt a counter-coup to restore him. The new government was fragile, and the Grand Vizier pressed Kösem for the final, terrible sanction. After days of agonizing, she gave her consent. On August 18, 1648, executioners entered the cafes. Ibrahim was strangled, his cries for his mother reportedly echoing through the palace. Kösem had made the ultimate sacrifice, cementing her reputation as the ruthless guardian of the Ottoman state, but at an unimaginable personal cost. With the execution of her son Ibrahim, Kösem Sultan once again found herself at the apex of Ottoman power. Her grandson, the 6-year-old Mehmed IV, was now sultan, and a regency was required. There was no question as to who would hold that power. At over 60 years old, Kösem was the most experienced and formidable political figure in the empire. She declared herself regent for a third time, a feat unmatched in Ottoman history. To solidify her unprecedented position, she bypassed the traditional title of Valide Sultan, which rightfully belonged to the new sultan's mother, and instead proclaimed herself Büyük Valide Sultan, the Grand or Elder Valide Sultan. This was a clear and public declaration that she, the grandmother, would be the one to rule. The boy sultan's mother, a young woman of Slavic origin named Turhan Hatice Sultan, was initially sidelined. She was only in her early 20s, politically inexperienced, and completely overshadowed by the towering reputation of Kösem. In the early days of Mehmed's reign, Turhan was expected to remain quiet in the harem, while the great Valide managed the affairs of state. But Kösem had underestimated her new daughter-in-law. Turhan possessed a keen intelligence and a fierce ambition, and she was not content to be a passive observer while another woman ruled in her son's name. She began to quietly cultivate her own network of allies within the palace, primarily among the black eunuchs led by the powerful chief black eunuch, who resented Kösem's reliance on the white eunuchs. The court slowly fractured into two distinct factions. On one side stood Kösem, the old guard, backed by the Janissaries, whose loyalty she had long commanded with strategic largesse and political maneuvering. On the other side stood Turhan, the young mother, representing a new generation and supported by key figures in the palace administration. The stage was set for the final and most dramatic power struggle of Kösem's life. It was a battle not against a son or a vizier, but against another woman, a rival queen fighting for the same prize: absolute control of the Ottoman Empire. The late 3rd century was a maelstrom of chaos for the Roman Empire, a period so turbulent that historians have branded it the crisis of the 3rd century. For 50 years, the empire was torn apart by civil war, foreign invasions, plague, and economic collapse. More than 20 emperors rose and fell, most meeting a violent end. The great Roman state, which had dominated the known world for centuries, was on the brink of complete disintegration. Into this vortex of despair stepped a man of humble origins but immense will, Diocletian. Ascending to the throne in 284 AD, he was a soldier, a pragmatist, who understood that the empire in its current form was no longer manageable. It was too vast, its enemies too numerous, its internal politics too poisonous for one man to rule alone. His solution was as radical as it was revolutionary. To save the empire, he would have to divide it. This was the birth of the Tetrarchy, the rule of four. Diocletian, ruling as Augustus in the east, appointed a trusted military colleague, Maximian, as his co-Augustus in the west. Each Augustus then adopted a junior emperor, a Caesar, who would serve as their second-in-command and designated heir. Galerius was appointed Caesar in the east and Constantius in the west. This wasn't a formal split of the empire into two separate entities, but an administrative division of labor. The four rulers, each with their own court and capital, could respond to threats on multiple frontiers simultaneously. A revolt in Britain could be handled by Constantius, while Diocletian repelled Persians on the eastern frontier. It was a system designed for stability and, crucially, to solve the succession crisis that had plagued Rome for decades. The Caesars were meant to peacefully succeed the Augusti, preventing the bloody power struggles that had become the norm. Alongside this political restructuring, Diocletian enacted sweeping administrative and military reforms, separating civil and military authority and reorganizing provinces to strengthen central control. While his economic policies, like the infamous Edict on Maximum Prices, ultimately failed to curb inflation, his political reforms bought the empire precious time. The Tetrarchy itself would not long survive its creator, but the precedent of a divided administration, an eastern and a western court, was set. Diocletian's gambit, born of desperation, fundamentally altered the character of the Roman Empire and laid the very foundation for its eventual permanent split. Diocletian's carefully constructed tetrarchy, designed to ensure stability and a peaceful transfer of power, crumbled into dust almost as soon as he abdicated in 305 AD. The ambition of powerful men could not be contained by a system, and the empire was once again plunged into a series of brutal civil wars as the various Caesars and sons of Augusti vied for ultimate supremacy. From this crucible of conflict emerged a figure who would not only reunite the empire under his sole command, but would also redirect the entire course of Western history: Constantine. The son of the Western Caesar Constantius, Constantine fought his way to power with tactical brilliance and ruthless determination. The defining moment of his rise came in 312 AD, on the eve of the Battle of the Milvian Bridge outside Rome. According to tradition, Constantine looked to the heavens and saw a vision of a cross of light, emblazoned with the words, "In hoc signo vinces." In this sign, you will conquer. He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields, and against all odds, they won a decisive victory. This event marked Constantine's personal conversion and the beginning of the Roman Empire's transformation from a pagan state into a Christian one. A year later, through the Edict of Milan, he and his co-emperor Licinius declared official tolerance for all religions, effectively ending centuries of brutal persecution against Christians. But Constantine's vision extended beyond just matters of faith. He recognized that the old city of Rome, steeped in pagan tradition and senatorial intrigue, was a capital of the past. The empire's strategic and economic heart had shifted eastward. In 330 AD, he inaugurated his new capital, strategically located on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. It was a new Rome, a city built to be the Christian capital of a Christian empire, a fortress city commanding the vital trade routes between Europe and Asia. It would be named Constantinople, the city of Constantine. By consolidating power, championing a new religion, and establishing a new center of gravity for the empire, Constantine did more than just win a civil war. He laid the foundations for a new civilization, the Byzantine Empire, which would carry the legacy of Rome forward for another 1,000 years. Long after the old Rome had fallen, while Constantine had given the empire a new capital and a new faith, he could not halt the immense demographic and military pressures building along its vast frontiers. The 4th and 5th centuries saw waves of migrations, a great movement of peoples that Roman historians collectively and often pejoratively labeled the barbarian invasions. This was not a coordinated assault, but a complex chain reaction of displacement and conflict, largely triggered by the westward expansion of a nomadic people from the steppes of Central Asia, the Huns. Their arrival in Eastern Europe in the late 370s set off a domino effect, pushing tribes like the Goths against the Roman border along the Danube River. Fleeing the fearsome Huns, the Visigoths sought refuge within the empire. They were allowed to cross, but Roman corruption and cruelty soon turned the desperate refugees into vengeful enemies. The breaking point came in 378 AD at the Battle of Adrianople, where a Gothic army annihilated a Roman legion and killed the Eastern Emperor Valens himself. The psychological shock was immense. The empire's vaunted military machine had been shattered, proving that the barbarians were not just raiders to be repelled, but a force capable of destroying Roman armies on Roman soil. Decades later, the Hunnic threat would coalesce into its most terrifying form under the leadership of one man, Attila. Known to the Romans as the Scourge of God, Attila united the Hunnic tribes into a devastating war machine, extorting vast sums of gold from the Eastern Empire and launching massive invasions into the West. He was the embodiment of the external chaos that besieged the dying empire. Meanwhile, the very fabric of the Western Empire was unraveling. In 410 AD, the Visigothic king Alaric did the unthinkable, leading his army to sack the city of Rome itself. For the first time in 800 years, the Eternal City fell to a foreign enemy. Though the physical damage was not catastrophic, the symbolic blow was fatal. The myth of Roman invincibility was dead. The empire was bleeding from 1,000 cuts, its borders breached, its provinces lost, and its ancient capital violated, all while the shadow of Attila loomed over the horizon. The fall of Rome was not a single cataclysmic event. It was not a grand battle or a dramatic siege. It was a slow, protracted collapse, a gradual decay of political authority, military strength, and economic stability. The year 476 AD is merely the date historians place on the tombstone, a symbolic marker for when the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist as a political entity. By the latter half of the 5th century, the Western Empire was a hollow shell of its former self. Its authority barely extended beyond Italy. Real power was not held by the emperors, who were now little more than puppets, but by powerful barbarian generals who commanded what was left of the Roman army. These figures, bearing the title Magister Militum, or Master of Soldiers, appointed and deposed emperors at will. The final act of this long political tragedy was surprisingly devoid of drama. In 475, the Magister Militum Orestes drove out the legitimate Western emperor Julius Nepos and placed his own young son on the throne. In a twist of historical irony, the boy was named Romulus Augustulus, combining the names of Rome's mythical founder and its first emperor. He would be its last. The barbarian mercenaries in the army, led by a chieftain named Odoacer, demanded land in Italy as payment for their service. When Orestes refused, they mutinied. Orestes was captured and executed, and Odoacer's forces marched on the capital, Ravenna. But there was no heroic last stand. The boy emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was simply deposed. Odoacer, recognizing the farce that the Western emperorship had become, chose not to appoint another puppet. Instead, he spared the boy's life, granting him a pension and sending him into a comfortable retirement. In a move of profound significance, Odoacer gathered the imperial regalia, the diadem, the purple robes, and the scepter, and sent them to Zeno, the emperor in Constantinople. The message was clear. The West no longer needed an emperor of its own. Zeno accepted this reality, granting Odoacer the title of patrician and recognizing his authority to govern Italy. And so the Western Roman Empire ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Its authority quietly transferred, its legacy left to be carried on by the surviving Eastern Empire and the nascent barbarian kingdoms that would one day become modern Europe.